Hi, my name is Rich. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch my YouTube video. This is episode 3, part B of It Costs Money to Run a Country. The title of today's episode, What Does Our Government Spend Our Money On? Or, What Does Our Government Not Spend Our Money On? In the previous videos, I've tried to explain that it really does cost money to run a country, and that it's America's responsibility to take care of the people living within its borders. That everyone is bitching about having to pay taxes, and that corporations are paying little or no taxes at all, even after billions of dollars of annual profits. Right now, we spend the majority of our money on defense, Social Security, and Medicare and Medicaid. The heartless motherfuckers known as the Republican Party, you know, the party of Jesus, want to cut or eliminate all programs that provide subsidies and entitlements to the poor and working poor in this country. And since the rich in this country are succeeding in amassing even more wealth on the backs of the middle class and working poor, there are more people now than ever before needing help from the federal government in the form of subsidies and entitlements. So how do we pay for things when the demand for government services is so high, but our government's revenue stream is so low? It's called deficit spending. It's government spending more than it takes in through taxes by borrowing money. Each year, this adds to our nation's debt. Therefore, our nation's credit card balance keeps increasing. To finance this debt, the United States sells treasury bonds and other types of securities, and we sell a lot of them to anyone, like China. And right now, our nation's debt sits at $18 trillion. This is in large part due to Bush and Cheney, who, in their infinite wisdom, thought it'd be okay to cut taxes while trying to pay for two simultaneous and pointless wars of choice. Yeah, I know, Obama. Obama's American Reinvestment Recovery Act, also known as the stimulus package. It added a few trillion dollars to our sovereign debt. But whether you want to acknowledge it or not, when Obama took office, he was trying to save this nation, thus the world, from driving off of a fiscal cliff. In 2008, unemployment was high, meaning there was slack in the labor markets. Lots of workers at home sitting idle. At the time, there were also extremely low interest rates, meaning there was slack in the capital markets, investable money, materials, and machinery sitting at home, sitting idle. So what's the purpose of a government stimulus? Government stimulus spending in a depressed economy, which we very much were, takes idle resources and puts them back to work. The problem is, even though 1.6 million jobs were created through the end of 2012, the $800 billion stimulus package simply wasn't big enough because it didn't eat up enough of the idle labor and capital to bring the economy back to full strength. Early on, the Obama administration was trying to appease Republicans by avoiding the dreaded T word, trillion. So they left the number purposely low, figuring, some stimulus is better than no stimulus at all. Which is true. The stimulus did work. Some. But even after the stimulus money was all spent, the economy stayed in the dumps for quite a while. Small businesses were still being lost, a lot of people stayed unemployed, home foreclosure rates remained really high. It wasn't until halfway through Obama's second term that the unemployment rate dropped below 5%. But because the economy didn't immediately jump back to full strength the day after the underfunded stimulus package bill was passed by Congress, Republicans were able to claim, neener. See, we knew the stimulus package wouldn't work. The fact is, it did work. It just would have worked better had the stimulus package been larger. We were trying to plug a $2 trillion gap in the economy with $800 billion. No amount of fancy math or quantum physics can make that happen. So anyway, I've explained what deficit spending is. Let's talk about how we actually spend our money. In the United States, we have certain government expenditures that are mandatory. That is, the Congress has no choice. They have to fund these programs because it's the law. We also have discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is money that has to be approved by Congress each year through an appropriations bill. This is the optional portion of our government's spending. Here's a chart showing where all the taxpayer-funded discretionary spending goes. As you can see, over half of our discretionary budget goes to the military. And as I mentioned on my last video, the United States spends as much on defense by itself as the next 7 largest military budgets combined. A statistic that is abso-fucking-lutely insane, given we don't fight conventional wars anymore, since our biggest threats come from, well, unconventional enemies. So you might be saying, yeah, but what about Russia? What about Korea? I'm sorry, North Korea. Okay, both countries are led by narcissistic despots. But even with their crazy-ass brains, they know that they don't want to end the world as we know it through a nuclear annihilation. They don't get to be crazy-ass despots anymore if they eliminate mankind from the face of the earth through nuclear holocaust. Right now, our most dangerous enemies have no state. They operate in small cells scattered throughout the world. More ships, tanks, and aircraft aren't going to help us against this kind of an enemy. Although President Drone Obama did like using those things to drop bombs on Middle Easterners' heads. Anyway, so on to what our government is not spending its money on. We spend the least on food and agriculture. Big deal, right? Cows and corn. Who cares? Well, it's not exactly right. Food and agriculture is where we budget for the food programs that feed our nation's poor. It's under food and agriculture where we address food insecurity amongst our nation's poorest children. Federal spending for food insecurity has both discretionary and mandatory components. So if you look at the discretionary spending chart again, the least amount of money goes to the food and ag budget at a mere 1% of all discretionary spending. The Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, known as WIC, and I'm sure everyone watching this video knows someone who takes advantage of this vital program. It's a program that services low-income pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and infants, and children under 5. This is by far the largest program serviced by the discretionary food and ag budget. Nowadays, ever since the Great Recession, there are a lot more people needing assistance than ever before. Obama did an incredible job getting this country back on track, even with the limited resources that he had. But as I alluded to in one of my earlier videos, most of the 11.9 million private sector jobs that were created by the Obama administration were service industry jobs, and service industry jobs tend to be low-skill, low-wage jobs. Since so many businesses refuse to offer their employees a living wage, the working poor have no choice but to resort to government food programs to feed their families. So, anyway, this brings us now to mandatory spending. And what is it? It's government spending on certain programs that are required by existing law. In 2016, Congress spent $2.3 trillion on mandatory programs. Please take a look at the chart again. Here's where we spend our money on mandatory programs. What really jumps out at you is what we spend on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, which is a whopping 3/4 of our mandatory spending. As I mentioned in an earlier video, Medicare and Medicaid is our nation's health care program for both low-income and older Americans. So here's the backstory. In 1965, as a part of President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, Medicare and Medicaid were created. They were born out of Johnson's vision of a general social commitment to meeting older Americans' health care needs. Medicare and Medicaid are social insurance programs. And they work because they allow the financial burdens of illness to be shared amongst healthy and sick people, high-income and low-income people alike. I mean, these really are socialist programs. And as I've just stated, they've been around a long time. Millions of Americans, Democrat and Republican, are on Medicare and Medicaid. Without these programs, these people would certainly die from both treatable and preventable illnesses and diseases. So, so much for this not being a socialist country, right? Social Security, also called Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Program, This was established by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1935. So it's been around, coming up on 100 years. Now, I'm definitely not going to go into all the nuances of Social Security. It's a large and complicated program. But I will say this. In 2015, 24% of the federal budget, of the whole federal budget, went to Social Security to the tune of $888 billion. As far as Medicare and Medicaid, now we can't just talk about these two programs without mentioning the Children's Health Insurance. The Children's Health Insurance Program called CHIP, and subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. They're now rolled into one. So these four programs now lumped together in the federal budget under healthcare. We paid a whopping $938 billion, damn near $1 trillion for this. Again, we can't say that we're not a socialist country. How many people are covered by Medicare and Medicaid? To include the Children's Health Insurance Program? Over 120 million people. That's a huge percentage of our population. By definition, makes us kind of a socialist country. As I said in my last video, Republicans want to slash Medicaid as well as CHIP by over $800 billion over the next 10 years, which will completely dismantle the program, leaving 70 million low-income children and adults without any health care coverage. Republicans are going to try to privatize Medicare to drive costs down. And because of that, seniors are going to have to pay out of pocket every penny of their health care while trying to do this, while trying to survive on a fixed income. So no longer, it doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't matter what it costs. If the government's going to pick up 0% of the tab, seniors won't be able to afford it. This is going to create an untenable situation for the majority of our retired seniors. Without a government safety net, health care will be unattainable for anybody poor and on a fixed income. These people will wind up in emergency rooms for every illness under the sun. And we will pay the tab. They're going to have to register at the emergency room as indigent, just as many people did before the Affordable Care Act came along. Again, is this really what Jesus would do? This form of healthcare is a lot more expensive than what's provided by the ACA. In fact, this form of healthcare is far more expensive than if we just had a single payer program, which means universal healthcare. Republicans don't want socialized medicine, but we already have socialized medicine. So at this point, what the fuck is so unpalatable about just giving every citizen in the United States universal health care? It's cheaper than sending everyone to an emergency room for the sniffles. I want to mention one more thing about the food and ag budget. As I alluded to before, the food programs that are part of the food and agriculture budget, like WIC, SNAP, and the school lunch program, are designed to address food insecurity in this nation, especially amongst our nation's poorest children. You can't learn when you're hungry. Now, these programs are woefully underfunded, and it's disgusting. And as stated before, this is by design. This is by design through reduced taxes. We're not trying to put money back in people's pockets. We're trying to create an excuse to not have to pay for things. Yeah, because this really is what Jesus would do. He hated children. Right. And who wants to pay higher taxes if it's just going to be wasted on helping people, right? Folks, it costs money to run a country. And running a country means taking care of the people that live within its borders. So I'm going to wrap this up. You want to know what really pisses me off about all of this? Everyone wants to debate the more academic parts of the Bible. Did Jesus condemn abortion? Did Jesus denounce gay marriage? What did he feel about mixed marriages? And did Jesus agree with the death penalty? But no one wants to ever talk about the one thing Jesus spoke of more than anything else in the Bible. Love. Jesus espoused love. He also espoused tolerance, forgiveness, and giving. Yes, giving. So one more time, Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Again, Matthew 5:42. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. 1 John 3:18. Little children, let us not love in word or in talk, but in deed and in truth. And finally, 1 John 4:7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. You have to excuse me, my wife is being very noisy right now. I think she's got a sweet tooth, so she's digging into something. Say hi, wifey. Yeah, there she is. Anyway, it's these principles that hardly anyone talks about anymore, especially Republicans. So folks, it's time we change the conversation. Well, that's it. Next time I'm going to talk about global warming. Especially, it seems especially apropos, considering Hurricane Harvey just got done wrecking parts of southern Texas and Louisiana. And Hurricane Irma, which by the time of this filming will have reached Florida as a Category 4 hurricane, and right now I think it's a Category 5 about to hit Puerto Rico. Oh yeah, the strongest Category 5 in human history. Yeah, climate change is a hoax. It's all bullshit, right? God. Until then, can we at least try to love each other a little more? And as you go about your daily lives, let's all just try to be better versions of ourselves. Take care.